Lammy, it feels like it's been a long time since we chatted. The last conversation we had was about you actually took the questionnaire that I've developed in my interview with a gamer series, and then we actually talked a little bit about what that questionnaire might be missing, what we could do differently with it. And one of the things that really struck for me was asking people about their experiences in gaming. Like what's something not only because some of my questions were has a game ever made you cry or has a game ever made you laugh? Has a game ever made you want to change your life? Things like that. Um, but there are other questions that could lead to interesting areas about like what kind of things happen when you play a game by yourself with other people. You're someone who talks about gaming in a social aspect. For me, gaming for a long time was a single player thing, something I did in a corner of a room with nobody watching, all by myself. And the connections I made with the game were wonderful, obviously, because I kept playing. But multiplayer is something that I shied away from for a long time. But there are experiences that people have in playing games that are not dissimilar to, growing up playing a sport and all the things that happen, not just in the playing of the sport, but around the playing of the sport. In fact, there's a whole culture around and in Twitch where people watch other people play and people play, and things happen both in the playing and adjacent to the playing. And I think that's fertile ground for me to ask people, but I don't really know how to ask that question. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we could define better and dig further into the experiences that a player has, again, not just in the game itself, but around the game. Does that make sense? Am I taking us down a good path here, or does this make zero sense at all?
No, it definitely makes sense. I think it's something. It's tough, You're the expert at asking the questions and coming up with good wording for it. Um, yeah, I think we could dig into that. And it's true, it has been a while, so it doesn't just seem like it's been a while. It has been a while. It's good to chat again.
So when you think about the time, like we talked a bit about your childhood playing games and watching other people play games, and the games that you played. When you think about the gameplay now, and it might not be obviously now, we don't always have time to play games, but in the last 5 years or so, when you're playing League of Legends, for example, um, and you're playing with other people, to what extent do you feel like you're playing with them or just adjacent to them? Like, to what extent do you feel like you're doing something with another person or group of people when you play?
So if it's a multiplayer game like League of Legends, let's say, and I am playing with friends, which is really the majority of the time. I mean, that's for me the reason I really play that game. If I weren't to play with anybody else, or if it wasn't a team game in the first place, I just wouldn't choose to play it. I'm sure. So really, it's all with others and not adjacent. Like it's adjacent if I do tend to open it up and just play a ranked game by myself or something. Which even if I do that, it's in the service of getting better at the game. Still with the goal of playing with friends, right? Like it's important to me to be good, so I might. It's almost like practice, or working on those skills that eventually it's still the most fun to play with others. But to me, for a game like League of Legends, that is what makes the game fun, is the team aspect and the multiplayer aspect of, as we've talked about before, it's sort of evergreen because you're always playing against real humans who make their own decisions, and your decisions just have to be better than yours, and your execution of those strategies and tactics have to be better as a team. And especially when we play and we're also on Discord in a call together, I mean, it's completely with others, right? That's the whole thing that makes it fun, and just like any social experience, sometimes we're not as social and we're quieter and we don't chat as much, we're tired. And other times, it's a roaring good time and we're just being silly and we're not taking it too seriously and we're mostly just chatting and socializing. And we've definitely had times after, we used to play with this buddy of ours who was also a streamer, and we used to play with him, and he would say like he's done for the night, and he'll be done playing, but we would just chat. Like he wouldn't end the stream, we would chat sometimes for more than an hour. Just leave, like we wouldn't be playing, he wouldn't be playing, his stream would still be on, and we would just be chatting like philosophy about life, of course, after he's like, okay, I'm done. That was my last one for the night. And then like a conversation would just organically sort of happen. And, we got told by people that that was sometimes the most fun aspect of the stream for them, or like that definitely was just as fun for us rather than just playing. It like many things, I think the activity is just the thing that brings people together. And the activity is fun, but yeah, it is definitely a social lubricant for sure.
I was just thinking that, like, if I think about times I've had people over to play, in real person, to play a board game or play cards or do some kind of activity, I don't really remember the activity. I have no recollection of who won what game in all of the times I've brought out any of the board, like, the board games we talked about in our episode about board games. I don't recall. Not only do I not recall who won, I don't recall what happened or how we got there. Surely sometimes there are a significant event that comes up and you remember that was crazy, but most of what I remember are the conversations. Most of what I remember are the connections that are developed between people. It's like, sitting around the Thanksgiving table and asking the question, what are you thankful for? That can bring up other things. It creates connection and an interesting synergy between people. And I wonder, again, coming from someone who hasn't played a lot of games with other people, I'm talking about video games. Um, do you ever feel like you miss the in person experience of someone sitting across from you or beside you when you're playing a game, or does the game do enough to make up for that lack of physicality, or is that not even important? And I understand that this is a very 21st century question, um, and there's yeah. Do you ever find that you're missing the realness of people, or is this, or not? Yeah.
Um, I think I'm someone, and maybe this comes back to sort of the imagination question. And we talked about the fact that I always liked to think that I was very imaginative, but then many times in our conversations, we realize, I don't really tell myself stories in that way, um, or visualize it in my head in that way. But on the other hand, I have found that for me, especially during the pandemic and all of the video calls and everything that has happened in the last while, I found that video meetings or Discord calls or any of that for me felt as much like I met somebody and I knew them as being in real person, to the point where eh, I would forget, like we would meet in real life and everybody would be like, oh wow, it's so nice to actually meet you. And I'd be like, we haven't met. And I wouldn't even realize, like to me, it was so real. Those interactions, especially over time, like these people that I play League of Legends with, I really know them. I mean, like in a real way, I know them as people. And whether or not we even see each other on video, though some of them I have, so I have that connection too. Like I have a visual of what they look like. Obviously, the way that they speak, their accents or their tonality, like just the way they emote. I know, when they've had a rough day at work, or when they're really happy because they did something really awesome. Like we are sharing these real life things with each other just from chatting on a regular basis. And I don't actually feel like, in some ways, I think the pandemic made these distance interactions more real. Like before that, we would maybe put on more of a persona. Like if we had to have a video call for work, we would be much more professional, I think, than when we realized like we can't be professional like that all the time. We can no longer, when you have to do this day in, day out, you have to just be yourself, even if you are on this sort of serious work meeting. And I actually think the pandemic did a great service to that, where, it used to be that it would be really unprofessional to hear a person's child or animal or pet like in the background or see them. And now I'm like, why? Why did we ever think that's real life? Those are real people. And that should be part, like, what's the problem? Why do we have to pretend in these professional settings that isn't true? And the same thing could have been said. I mean, I think gamers have been doing that for a lot longer because obviously it's a social and not really a professional setting. But I feel like I do get a lot out of it. I feel like I am there in person. I mean, think of how long we've been playing tabletop together, and for a long time hadn't met, and it didn't feel to me like we hadn't met. Everyone's personality came across so well that didn't really make that much of a difference. Now I really enjoy in person as well, but I don't know. I might enjoy it more just because we can, share a meal together or do other things that obviously we can't necessarily directly do. Like we can literally be like, try this, it's good. Something that we can't do when we're online. But other than that, a lot of the interaction I think is quite the same. And I guess the reason I brought up imagination is because maybe in that way, my imagination is strong enough that I link it to just like as if we had been there in person. Like I can very much suspend my disbelief. It's the same with games where, at first I'm aware that I'm playing a game or that maybe the graphics are very bad, but 10 minutes into it, the controls melt away, how bad the graphics are melt away. I am so immersed into whatever it is, and it's the same with these, distance, whatever it is, voice calls, video calls, where I feel like I just forget. After a while, I'm just a brain that is sharing, information with some other brains, and nothing else is really important. The physicality of it isn't important. I don't know if that's the same for you.
No, that's a wonderful answer, and I think it actually is. But not in all circumstances. Like there still is a sense of presentation for me sometimes in video calls, if it's with someone new. But the same is true if it's just a meeting in person. As Chris Rock, I think, said, you're never actually meeting someone; you're meeting their representative. And I think he was referring to dating. Like you don't when you go on a first date, you don't meet the person. You meet who they want you to meet. You meet their PR person. And that's something that we all do. We put on a front. It's almost a necessary part of modern life, but it's also necessary to find out who we are and to find a way to share who we really are with other people. And if our only avenue to do that is online, then we're going to find a way to relax and let go and be ourselves. And that can be at work, but it can also be in a social event with friends. It can be in both. And there can be a much more fluid mix. Yeah, sure, there are things that you can do in person, like eating food or arm wrestling or something like that, that you can't do online. But there are things you can do online that you can't do in person. The immense worlds that have been created with Minecraft or World of Warcraft or pretty much any game that we've talked about that has come out in the last 15 years or so are so massive that they can't be repeated in a room with a board game out of a box. D&D might be a good example of something that can be recreated and where people can have these wonderful massive imaginations, but that can be done online too. And so we're not losing as much as I think we thought we were, as long as we feel that we're sharing. And sharing who we are. You said sharing information, and I think some of that is information about who I really am. And so, yeah, I would say it's the same. I don't have as much experience with games with other people, and I probably, maybe I do less video calls than you do. So, I still probably feel a sense of not. I certainly don't look pretty. Like I'm not trying to make myself that presentable, as you can tell. But I'm aware that I'm being recorded. I'm aware that I'm on camera in a way that if we met up in a cafe, I would much more easily forget that. And I've spent some time working as an actor, and the difference between acting for theater and acting for film is quite significant. And I always felt uncomfortable on film. Like I could let go on stage. There's nothing recording me. There's nothing holding on to something. I can be present with other people. Whereas on film, I've got to get the angle right. I've got to think about lighting. I've got to think about the timing and what my face is doing, what my face is not doing. And it's just too intense it's too technical for me. And sometimes I get that sense when I'm doing a video call of, oh, right, I've got to make sure I'm on the screen properly and is my microphone working or whatever. But if I can let go of that, I can get to the same place of realness and sharing an experience. So then, to the original question, I'm really just asking, like, what's it like hanging out with your friends, really? Which I don't know how the hell you would answer. I don't know how I'd answer that. And nor would I, it's probably not even appropriate to ask someone, tell me about some fun experiences you've had while hanging out with your friends. But maybe an interesting question would be, what can a game do? And we talked about this a little bit before. What can a game do to improve the experience that is adjacent to it? as opposed to the experience just of playing it. Um, yeah, does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a bit. Is it emergent gameplay? What's the term for, when like you kind of get these crazy situations?
Yeah, emergent gameplay, I think. Yeah.
Is that the term? Yeah. So I mean, there's definitely games that really, really have a lot of fun because they create opportunities for emergent gameplay. So Minecraft being the best example of this, where it gives you the sandbox, and then all the fun things that happen are kind of really just play that the players create, but you get situations, and maybe not as much directly in Minecraft because there's not a lot of unknown sort of events. But even in Minecraft, let's say, you get these situations where you might have worked really hard on something, and things can go wrong, right? A creeper can get into your base, explode everything that you've worked hard on, that maybe like has knock-on effects to everything else that's happened. And you get these funny, maybe stressful, but usually that creates something memorable or like a challenge to overcome, another goal that it gives you. And I think you can totally ask questions about that. So I did come up with a story. I'll try to remember now because it's been a long time, but I do remember this one moment where I had, a very, very memorable experience that was created because of the rules sort of and the world that I was playing in. So I was playing Astroneer, which is kind of Minecraft like, not super Minecraft like, but there is mining. It is kind of a world in which you can craft and mine. And I had this very funny experience where we had, you know, used a lot of resources to create these rovers to get us across these planets faster, to mine more resources, to bring them back, to craft more things, right? The whole goal being to explore, but also save ourselves, survival kind of on this planet. And I got the rover stuck. So this was an experience that happened because of the framework that the game gave me. And almost the entire play session was spent trying to save myself and this rover, and the hilarious hijinks that essentially occurred because the more I tried to get, like, you have this mining tool and I was trying to get it unstuck, but it just kept falling for, like, I had a moment where I almost got it, and then I fell into another hole with it. Like, it was just, and ridiculously memorable. I was streaming at the time, so there are clips of this. And, it was really, really, it was funny. I mean, it was challenging. And in terms of the game itself, it was a failure in many ways, but also the game raised the stakes. Like, this rover was important. It was a valuable resource that if we lost would mean a lot of, time and resources in the game lost. And so it created a sense of urgency and importance to this thing that happened. And it was an emergent gameplay experience that, like, it was so enjoyable. I mean, I laughed so hard. I can't even express still, even now thinking about it, just how ridiculous the situation was. And that happens in these games that create opportunities for this kind of emergent gameplay. And I don't know how much you get that in a single player game. I mean, you can, depending on what the game is. And some games are literally made to create these experiences. Like, that's sort of how they're just really good at doing that because they have a lot of intertwined, maybe generated systems that therefore you can get some really crazy things happen. And I do tend, it seems, to gravitate towards those games. Like, we talk a lot about roguelites because everything is procedurally generated. Sometimes you just get these crazy runs, either impossibly difficult and terrible, which in itself is funny, or just so overpowered that you think, wow, like, how do you craft this kind of thing all the time? Um, and I think that's a good question to ask players, is maybe about their emergent gameplay experiences and whether that relates to a social aspect. I mean, part of the reason it was so fun in Astroneer for me is we were on a voice call with the other people building, and who knows if I would have been so animated and laughing so hard and taking it so seriously if it were just me. But there was this action of it's funnier to share it with the group.
Yeah, there's something really interesting in what you're talking about. You say would you have had the same experience if it was just you? I doubt it. By the way you're talking about it, I mean, if we think about art, art exists between people. Art exists between a creator and a receiver, or between two creators, or whatever. But it exists between, whether it's a painting, a film, a video game, whatever. It's the between that's important. It can be between one person and another. It could be a solo experience, a communion with a piece of art. But there is a sense that art can make the painful and the frustrating and the difficult into something funny, rewarding, lovely, wonderful, interesting, provocative, whatever. So your experience of just being stuck, I mean, if we just take away the video call, take away the other people, take away the comedy, being stuck sounds stupid. You know, it doesn't sound very fun. It sounds hard, and it sounds like, why didn't you just give up? You know, or what were you trying to strive for that was so important? What made it interesting was the art and the sharing between people, from what I'm hearing. And if I think of a game of charades, for example, or something where being ridiculous is no longer just humiliating and uncomfortable, it's actually a gateway into a uh, shared joy, a communal experience of laughter and fun that normally would not be okay. Normally, tripping, like, you know, the Just for Laughs, or a comedy channel or something where people just trip and fall in the street. Normally not funny. Normally painful, shameful, humiliating, uh, not fun. And yet you put it on camera. You had a laugh track, and you show that no one was injured in doing this, and suddenly becomes not only interesting, but joyful. And that is, I think, one of the powers of art, and certainly one of the powers of video games. And so, if I think about ridiculous moments that have happened in single player, yeah, they happen, but I skip past them because I don't want to sit in the misery of it. I want to move on. I want to get back to my dopamine hit. But that same thing that I'm moving past in single player might be something I can spend 4 hours sharing with other people in a ridiculous scenario. You know, again, tabletop role playing, D&D, great example. You can spend an entire session laughing about one single screw up or one thing that one person said and just seeing where it goes, and that's improv. But it wouldn't work with one person. You would just kind of, oh, I'm gonna push that aside. It's the magic of almost creating art, is to accept that which isn't working, or doesn't seem to be working, and make that into the thing that we can all enjoy and share. Yeah.
So, one thing in terms of gaming for this that seems important, one of the ways to make these memorable experiences is through sort of janky mechanics, right? So, for me in Astroneer, and it wasn't really janky, it wasn't a bug, but the way the tools worked, right? The way that the game was made meant that what happened to me was possible and in fact likely. And you know, you're digging these holes with this mining tool that you have, and the mining tool works in a very specific way. Unlike Minecraft, where everything is blocks, and you know you have your blocks, and it's very clear exactly what's going to happen. Astroneer has this sort of extruder and like digger tool that it works a bit differently. It doesn't create these perfect little shapes. It's very, you know, it's not quite obvious exactly where the ground beneath you is going to go, and you have to sort of have a mastery of this tool to understand how to use it properly. And you know, the fact that you're making a bunch of holes and now you're driving a rover and you have to know where your own holes are so you don't fall into them, kind of like I did, um, is the game isn't made, it's like real life. It's not like they made it to be perfectly easy. Like in many ways, Minecraft isn't going to have that issue because it's giving you a perfect little grid of where everything is. So you know exactly what you're doing. But the choices in Astroneer to sort of go for this more free-flowing, more maybe like realistic life version of it made this experience possible. And the other thing about sharing it with somebody else is I bet you've had the experience where something really ridiculous has happened to you in a single player game, but not being able to explain it to anybody else because either nobody plays the game or understands. Like to have that shared thing because everybody was there and saw it and understands it because they're in that same world. They're watching, they're there. So even if you had something amazing happen, it's almost frustrating because you're like, oh my God, this insane thing happened. How would I even describe it to somebody else? It was like, it was really crazy. It was really notable. But, you have to find that group of people who would understand it. So, I have lots of these, I have so many good versions of this from Outer Wilds, but you can only share them with somebody who's finished the game to be like, okay, well, when this specific thing happened to me, and because somebody's played it, they can go, wow, what are the chances of that? Like, what are the odds of that? There's these things that are so just, how could that have happened? And you can't really share it with somebody unless they've also experienced at least the world, at least the sandbox that you're talking about. So they have something to latch onto and some knowledge to know about. So it can be even in single player games, but you still need that community, right? As we talked about, like I do play single player games, but I enjoy them more if I'm playing at a time when others that I know are playing it or finding a community online that I can talk to about it. And I wanted to ask you just on a slightly different topic that we were talking about earlier in terms of performing when on camera or online in some way. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I find that there are people who are very different, like have very different personalities or come across very differently based on the medium that you sort of see them through. And the one that always comes to mind for me is that there are people who I think are so funny in their written persona on social media or online. Like they just, every status update or tweet, or they're really funny. The way they write is like, has all of this character and then in real life, those people could be so boring and just not have any of that verve. And it's only certain people, like some people I find are pretty similar. The way they act online is the way that they are in person. And I do think some of it is just skills. Like some people are just better writers and, and probably that's why that comes across. But I wonder if you've had a similar experience. I definitely know people where I'm like, man, I would follow your blog or I would watch, I would like totally engage with you in whatever you seem to be good at, and then don't want to actually spend any time with you in person. Like, you are just funnier when we're. So I don't know if you know people like that, but I've always been really fascinated by how engaging with people in different realms can actually feel quite different. I don't know if you have any stories like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that it's not just about the medium too. It's about the different masks you put on in your life. If we're to take away the mediums, let's just say the only way we're going to interact with this character is in person, visually and with their voice. Well, they might act differently in different situations. Like I lived in the UK for a while, and it's amazing not only how many accents there are in the UK. There's an accent in different regions of London. There's an accent in Northern England and Southwest England. You're just staying in England. You haven't gone to Scotland or Ireland or Wales yet. And there's so many different accent groups and accents. But beyond that, there are people who change their accent throughout the day. Someone who might wake up at home, have one accent with their spouse, go to work, change their accent, have lunch with a friend, change their accent. With the friend is maybe from college, they have an accent that they went where they went to college, and then in the evening they have, I don't know, drinks with another group of friends, and a totally different accent comes out. I've seen this at play. That might be kind of an extreme number of accents in the course of a day, but I'm sure there are British people who could relate. We in North America don't have access to the same pool of accents, obviously, or at least in Canada we don't. There are some, but not nearly as many. But we still shift our masks throughout the day. I know that I do, and I can certainly see it in other people, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Like the way that I interact with my wife at home, that's ours. I'm not, to say I have no integrity because I'm a different person with different people, I would say it's not. Doesn't belong to you. This version of me is not for you. And so I can certainly feel that I'm different, and it sounds like it's almost nefarious when we talk about wearing masks or being a different person, but I almost think it's necessary to function in a complex society like we live in, where there are so many different things pulling on us and requiring things of us. So yeah, and I do know people who I mean, if I just think about the way that they write and the way that they speak, and then the way that they might present on a stage delivering a lecture versus how they're just sitting in a chair in a pub or something. Uh, and some are better at different things than others. Some are the same in every context. And I would find that hard to do, you know, like to almost float with whatever the experience, whatever the circumstances is easier for me to force myself into the experience and be the same person everywhere I go. That would feel exhausting to me. So yeah, I think gaming would be an interesting way to see if there are different aspects of people, different facets of people in the context of gaming. Like, you know, when I'm playing a game with you, I'm one version of me. But if I'm playing a game with a group of strangers, like you and I have done, you and I have played a game before, Valheim, and we played with other people that I didn't know, I was probably different to some extent. I was probably a little bit more self deprecating, probably trying to make jokes a little bit more, less relaxed, um, but also happier to be quiet and let other people take the stage. Maybe, I don't know, but this is probably something we all face, and an interesting question for someone making a game of how do you reveal those masks and make it interesting for people to be revealed through playing.
The last question I have for you, because you often say, right, that you don't experience gaming as much as a social thing, and you're just playing your single player game. But coming back to this idea that even if you're playing a single player game, humans, I think, have a natural tendency to want to share even that experience with others. I've seen even in your own behavior that you really like to bring up. You kind of want to explain. Okay, so this game that you're really into, what it's like, what the challenges are, what you're doing in it. There's this level of passion and sort of glint in your eyes when you're talking about the games that you're interested in, that you do seem to like to share them. That it isn't just something you want to keep just to yourself. You are kind of looking, and unfortunately, you haven't found it in me. We don't tend to play those games, but maybe in Artemis, right? You share that you've both played this game. You know what you're each talking about. You can share an experience. You can say, well, you can't believe, I had this, like I was doing this and I tried this strategy and it didn't work out, or it did. And you can kind of have that back and forth. And I know you keep saying, you're not this social gamer in a way, but do you find that in yourself? Like I see it in you. I see that desire to kind of want to share this experience with other people, or to find somebody else that is as excited about it and to just talk about it, right? To have it be something that isn't just in your own head.
Yes, the answer to your question is yes. I definitely feel that passion and desire to share it, but I would caveat it and say that for most of my life playing games, that desire has been suppressed, and I have not talked about it with anybody for most of my time. And whether it's because I was trying to hide that version of myself from my daily life, which is probably in my 20s, like when I played games, it was always something I did by myself that I probably wouldn't tell anybody about, because it didn't connect with what I was doing. Like I was working in the theater. And at that time, anyways, it was not cool to be playing games while you were supposed to be, making theater and being in your body and reading plays and crap like that. And that was probably just an impression I put on myself. But I spent so long not talking about games that that desire is probably greater now because it was suppressed for so long. And I'm not used to talking about games. Like part of this series about me talking about games is revelatory for me because it's not something I normally do. It was a very private thing. It still is a very private thing. And revealing that and opening that up, I think, has been an important part of my own development, personally, professionally, creatively. But it's an interesting question and something I think I'm still grappling with, because probably for most people that I know in my professional life and my personal life, they might suspect that I might be someone who plays games, but they've never heard me talk about it, right? Um, I might seem like someone to them who would play games, but I would never talk about it. I would never bring it up. Even if they brought it up, I'd be, oh, I could talk about this with them, but I won't. And that's a weird shame complex that I developed probably as a teenager. That these games are addictive and not cool and not helpful and a waste of your time and all of that stuff that was hammered into me. still somewhat present. Um, yeah. Lammy, we're past half an hour. I think both of us have to go, but this has been really interesting. I think there's more to talk about here. Is there anything specific that you want to continue talking about, or that we missed talking about, or do you want to leave it open ended again for next time?
I mean, I feel like we could maybe dig into what you were just talking about there, the identity of a gamer and how you know, how it's seen in sort of a wider social aspect, and obviously it's changed over time, but as more and more people game, and as what video games become changes, maybe talk a bit more about that. I'm not sure if we if there's much more to say. I know we've touched on it many times, but maybe have something dedicated to that. So the progression, obviously, from uh the original intent of gamers to be kids for a while. I mean, at first it was boys, then like all of this stuff. We can maybe spend some time talking through that.
Okay, cool. Let's do it. I look forward to it. We'll see you next time.